U.S. military forces have conducted 2 raids on foreign countries targeting senior terrorist leaders. In Somalia, U.S. Navy SEALs stormed the villa of a leader of the Al-Shabaab militant group responsible for the deadly attack on a Nairobi shopping mall last month. And another operation was carried out in the Libyan capital, Tripoli, where the military seized a suspect in the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. Well, for more on this, let's now talk to Ryan Dawson from WhatReallyHappened.com. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us here on RT. Well, Al-Shabaab says it will keep staging attacks until Kenyan troops withdraw from Somalia. So what does this essentially mean for the U.S. effort?
Well, you have to question how sincere the U.S.'s war on terrorism really is. And you'd have to really go back to 2006 to understand why there's an Al-Shabaab to begin with. But taking out a particular militant leader or trying to capture a terrorist is not going to be very effective on the war on terrorism. They'll be replaced tomorrow. They have to really strike the root of the problem. They have to address the political issues in Somalia, which they're never going to do.
Well, also, another problem is that Washington recently expressed concerns over Al-Shabaab recruiting in the U.S. But what can Washington do about this?
Well, they really need to look at why there is an Al-Shabaab and what their grievances are. A lot of the mercenaries in Somalia have joined Al-Shabaab because the economy is in a complete collapse, and this is somebody who will pay them, and they'll pay to fight. They have families to feed. If they would address the economic issues, they could do a lot more damage to terrorist recruitment than trying to chase around individual terrorists.
Well, you mentioned the economy, and of course, these operations come at the worst time possible for the United States itself. Since the government shut down, of course, as we know, hundreds of and thousands of workers they had to take unpaid leave there. So, how much more complicated this makes things for the U.S.?
Well, I'm sure there will probably be some Republicans out there who, I don't know if they're correct or not, but they'll look at the timeliness of this with the government shut down and all the heat at home on Obama and say, 2 raids suddenly, we capture an Al-Qaeda leader in Libya as well, and then there's a raid in Somalia, which failed, possibly. They had to retreat. But you have to look at the timeliness of this and question it a little bit, because these things seem to be used as PR sometimes. The U.S. has no problem supporting terrorists all over the rest of the world. So for them to be fighting terrorists in Somalia sounds a little disingenuous when they're supporting MEK and Jandala and Al-Qaeda in Syria, as well as al-Nusra and many other terrorist groups all over the world.
But why do you think there's such double standards, as you just mentioned? I mean, what's the reason behind all that?
Well, the war on terrorism has really replaced the Cold War to justify massive military spending. And so when they're supporting a dictator like Hadi in Yemen, who won an election because of his only name on the ballot, or they're supporting Al-Qaeda, organ-eating mercenaries in Syria, or whether it's the Mujahideen in Afghanistan or any of these terrorist groups or drug cartels and so on, if they are supporting U.S. policy in the region, then it's not terrorism and it's not spoken of. If they're opposing neocolonialism and U.S. hegemony, then they're terrorists. It's not about how they act or who they kill or what they do that makes them terrorists. What makes them terrorists in the eyes of Washington is, are they obeying Washington? U.S. has a record of killing suspected terrorists with drones, and this time it seems like the U.S. has taken a different approach by putting the boots on the ground. Why do you think that happened? Why is the tactics different this time? I think Obama's trying to look a little stronger, and also the drone attacks have lost a lot of credibility. A lot of times they say they killed a particular member of Al-Qaeda hierarchy, and then that person turns out to still be alive, which begs the question, who did they actually kill? They've also, accidentally or not, been killing a lot of civilians with drones. And they've been doing the double tap in Pakistan and Yemen, where they actually have been attacking the responders who come. And so a lot of Americans are opposed to drone attacks. So maybe the boots on the ground was a tactical switch as much to feed the public in the U.S. as it was to actually be effective.
Well, if we compare the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, which killed 4 American diplomats just a year ago, I mean, shouldn't Washington draw some lessons from that one? I mean, shouldn't be worried that Tripoli operation might draw some more anger?
You would think so, assuming that that's what their interests are. But again, fostering more terrorism actually feeds into the perpetual spending for the Pentagon. So if you assume that their goal is to actually stamp out terrorism and not
lose U.S. life, then of course they should draw some lessons from that. But if you look at it differently and see that they intentionally foster and pay for terrorists, then it looks a little different. They're not worried about what the reaction is because the story will start in the U.S. media from they attacked us and we have to get them. And whatever happened before that will never be mentioned.
All right, Ryan Dawson, writer for WhatReallyHappened.com. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us here on RT.